In Mark chapter 4 and in Mark chapter 6, he gives to us two eyewitness reports to show us that Jesus has power and authority, not just as we have seen already that Jesus has power and authority over demons, and Jesus has power and authority over sickness and disease, but now by these two accounts, these two eyewitness reports, Mark shows us that Jesus has power and authority over nature. Specifically, Jesus has power and authority over the wind and the water. He is in fact the mighty God. He is the mighty God of the Old Testament dwelling among them. He is the God of creation. He is the God who exercises his authority over animals and insects, frogs, and flies. He is the God who turns the Nile into blood to force the deliverance of his people. That God had come among them in the person of Jesus Christ, and they knew it not. He is the God who leads his people by cloud and pillar of fire in the sky. He is the God who opens the Red Sea and the Jordan with the breath of his nostrils. He is the God who feeds his people in the wilderness and made the sun stand still. He is the with us God, and he has come among them in the person of Jesus Christ. Mark shows us that the disciples are surprisingly slow. Surprisingly slow to have faith. They are slow to understand. They are slow to grasp truth, even when it hits them in the face. How they fail, Mark says, is how they fail and fall so quickly into fear and despair when trials and troubles come. Mark shows us how they are in constant need of reminding of things that they should never forget. To be truthful, I find Mark's honest portrayal of the disciples rather comforting. Because if the truth be told, sometimes I need reminding. The truth be told, sometimes I'm a little bit slow. Sometimes my knife ain't as sharp as it ought to be, and my elevator don't go as far to the top as it ought to go. Sometimes I need reminding of things that I ought not forget. I find Mark's portrayal to be very transparent and encouraging to me, because sometimes, in spite of what I've seen and heard, I need reminding. And sometimes I need to be reminded that every delay is not a denial. That every resistant circumstances doesn't mean retreat. And every storm is not the end of my story. Is anybody in here in a storm? By these two accounts and eyewitness reports showing that Jesus has power and authority over the wind and the waters, Mark reminds us of 5 things that I come to talk to you about today. Can we talk a little bit today? Mark reminds us by these two stories in Mark chapter 4 and in Mark chapter number 6. And I got to tell you, can I pause here, put a pin right here? I got to tell you that this has been a most unique journey these last 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks for us as we are living out the book of Mark, and it is in real time. We talk about demons and we fight demons. We talk about sickness and we fight sickness, and we get ready to talk about storms, and storms arise. And so this text for me today is real time. Mark reminds us then of 5 things. Mark reminds us, number one, Mark reminds us that storms happen. Somebody say storms happen. Storms happen. This is not to minimize or dismiss the fact that they are in a storm or the fact that you are sitting here today in a storm. But it is to say that you and I ought not be overly surprised when storms come, because storms happen. Storms happen. And the matter of fact that the more you follow Jesus, the more you seek to obey Jesus and follow him, the more storms seem to happen. In fact, Jesus says that in the world you will have storms, but be not afraid. I've overcome the world. In Mark chapter 4, storms come. A storm rises in the evening. Jesus instructs his disciples to get on the boat. Get on the boat and go to the other side. Get on the boat and go to the other side. And a storm in the evening, a windstorm arises. And it is breaking into the boat. In Mark chapter 6, Jesus commands the disciples, surprisingly, to get on the boat and go to the other side. And again, a windstorm comes around 3 a.m. Have you ever noticed that storms seem to come in the middle of the night? That problems and emergencies and crises seem to happen in the middle of the night. Why can't they happen at noon time? But storms seem to happen in the middle of the night. And so around 3 a.m., storms and the winds, storms rises in the evening, and in the middle of the night, storms seem to always happen just when you got far enough that it's too far to go back. Storms can happen at any time, and from my perspective, storms always happen at the wrong time. Look at verse number 36. Verse number 36 of chapter 4 says that you can take Jesus with you and still have a storm. We used to sing, take the Lord along with you. Everywhere you go, he will be your guide. Everywhere you go, take the Lord along with you everywhere you go. Verse 36 tells us that you can take Jesus with you in your boat and still have a storm. Though the winds and the waves seem to catch us by surprise, Jesus is not at all surprised. Tell somebody, storms happen. The second thing I come to remind you of is not only do storms happen, but listen, just because you're in a storm doesn't mean you're not in the will of God. Can I say that again? Just because you're in a storm doesn't mean you're not in the will of God. In Mark chapter 4, the disciples are fighting hard to survive in a boat that's filling up with water while their hearts are filling up with fear. In Mark chapter 6, the disciples are struggling painfully against the headway of the wind because the wind is against them. Do you see this? That they are trying to do what Jesus said. They're not in disobedience. They're not running away from Jesus like Jonah. They didn't get on the boat and go down to Tarshish when he told them to go to Nineveh. Jesus told them to get on the boat and go to the other side. And they are trying to do what Jesus said, and it's hard. Anybody ever tried to do what Jesus said and it was hard? I don't understand these folk. I can't connect and identify with folk for whom obey Christ, obey Jesus all the time, and life is always a party. Because there have been times when I've obeyed Jesus, and the more I obeyed, the more it seemed like I was rowing against the wind. Jesus told them to get on the boat. Am I talking to myself? Jesus told them to get on the boat and go to the other side, knowing Jesus put them on the boat, sent them to the other side twice, knowing that the storm was coming. Just because you're in a storm doesn't mean you're not in the will of God. You can obey Jesus and still get caught in a storm. Don't despair. And don't think to go back. Just because you're in a storm doesn't mean you're not in the will of God. Don't lose heart. Tell somebody next to you, don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. Jesus can use the storm you're in for his glory and for your good. Just because you're in a storm doesn't mean you're not in the will of God. Next thing I came to tell you is just because there's resistance doesn't mean you're going the wrong way. Just because the winds of circumstance are pushing against you doesn't mean you should stop going. See, we can't misread life and think that because life gets hard that it means to go back. We quit far too soon when we assume that hardness means wrongness. Because sometimes the only indication that I have that I'm going in the right direction is the resistance. So progress is slow and resistance be formidable. Anybody ever got up in the morning with your mind set to do what he said? Some of you this morning, you got up with your mind stayed on Jesus. And you didn't make it. You're listening to me online because the storm and the winds pushed against you. And you thought that the wind meant to stop. Sometimes the wind means row harder. Progress seems slow and resistance is formidable. Jesus said, go. And whatever he commands, he enables. So though the winds are blowing and the waves are rising and the water is filling up the boat, he says, keep on rolling. Tell somebody next to you, keep rolling. Keep rowing. Keep rowing. Come on, just keep rowing. Keep rowing. Keep rowing. You keep rowing because Jesus commanded it. Keep rowing because Jesus said, keep going. Keep rowing because Jesus said, go to the other side. And so, though the winds be against me and though the waves are washing and filling up the boat, my mind will not be filled with fear. I will keep on rowing against fear. Keep rowing against discouragement. Keep rowing against the winds. Keep rowing. Jesus said, keep going. Tell somebody, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Because just because there's resistance, it don't mean stop. Keep going. Keep going. I'm almost finished. Can I tell you, Jesus, listen, can you take a couple more? Just because Jesus is silent, hear me. Just because Jesus is silent doesn't mean he doesn't care. Do you hear me? Just because Jesus is silent doesn't mean he doesn't care. Mark chapter 4 and verse 17, they are fighting hard to survive the storm while Jesus is chilling in the back on a cushion. In Mark chapter 6, they are trying to make headway, and the text says painfully difficult headway, while Jesus stands on the shore watching. They took him in the boat, and he's chilling in the back. He sends them across the lake. And now he's standing there watching. The storm has them in fear of their lives. And so, hearing nothing from Jesus, you ever been in a storm and heard nothing? You ever looked for a word and heard nothing? Oh, I'm just up here talking to myself. I'm in the wrong church because all y'all deep. Hearing nothing from Jesus and seeing no visible signs of movement, they question if he cares. Is that not reasonable? That they are in a storm, that they are in fear of their lives, and not only is he not doing anything, he ain't saying nothing. Nothing. The dark skies and the sound of crashing waves and strong winds convince them that Jesus does not care. They say, Jesus, Master, don't you care that we are perishing? Don't you care? Andrew Peterson puts it this way when he talks about the silence of God. He said, it is enough to drive a man crazy. It'll break a man's faith. It's enough to make him wonder if he has ever been sane. When he's bleeding for comfort from the staff and thy rod, and heaven's only answer is the silence of God. But Jesus says, do not fear. Tell somebody, do not fear. Do not fear the silence. Do not fear the silence. Do not fear that your eyes do not see visible signs of intervention. Do not fear the silence. Do not fear what looks like that he is not moving. Jesus says, I am here. Jesus says, I am here. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes I don't need him to do anything. Sometimes I don't need great signs and wonders. Sometimes I don't need the sun to stand still. I just need to know you here. I just need to know you with me in this storm. I just need to know you see, however far you may seem to be standing on the shore. I need to know you see me and you know what's going on. Jesus. It's just because there's silence, Mark shows us, doesn't mean he doesn't care. Jesus, last thing I want to say to you, and I'm done this morning. Jesus calms storms. That's my Jesus calms storms. Jesus calms storms. He's calmed storms. There ain't many testimonies here at all. Jesus calms storms. Chapter 4. In chapter number 4, Jesus speaks to the storm. Chapter 4, he speaks to the storm. What a voice he must have. What authority and clarity he must have. That he speaks to storm. He speaks to storms. How do you know which wind to speak to? How do you know which molecule of water to talk to? Jesus speaks to storms, and winds cease and waves are calm. In fact, the text tells us that he didn't just get calm. He says it was a great calm. Jesus speaks to storms. In chapter 6, Jesus doesn't say a word. Chapter 6, Jesus doesn't say a word. There's no prophetic utterance. There's no speaking to the storm. In chapter number 6, Jesus simply climbs on board the boat. And the winds cease. And the waves cease. Sometimes I don't need a dramatic rescue from the boat. I just need the wind to stop for a minute. I just need the wind to stop for a minute. I just need the waves to calm for a minute and let me catch my breath, because sometimes breakthrough is peace. And sometimes breakthrough is his presence. Jesus is in the storm, and he will calm your raging sea and speak peace to you. I'm a witness. Though he seems slow in acting, call him. He will answer. Though he seem long in coming, wait for him. He will come. He will come, and he will come. In fact, he will come walking on the waters you thought would drown you. Chapter 4, Jesus calms the storm with his word. But in chapter number 6, he calms the storm with his presence. Sometimes he don't have a word, Mary. Sometimes he's silent, and we don't get answers. We don't get clarity. We don't get insight. We don't get answers to our questions. Sometimes he don't say a word. He just gets on the boat with us, and he just says, "I got you, baby. I got you." Sometimes it's enough to know that he got me. Jesus, can I tell you, Jesus still calms storms. This is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid. Jesus still calms storms. This is for somebody. Look at him and tell him Jesus still calms storms. He still gives his peace and his presence in the midst of our storms. This is what he promised. He says, listen, thus said the Lord that created you, O Jacob, and formed you. Put your name there. Put your name right now. Thus said the Lord that created you, O Lawrence, and formed you, O Lawrence. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. When you pass through the waters, he says, I will be with you. When you walketh through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon you, for I am the Lord your God. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, for I, he says, will keep you in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on me, because whose mind is stayed on me, because he trusts. Look up, somebody look up and say, I trust you, Lord. Tell them, say, I trust you, Lord. I trust you, Lord. I might be in a storm, but I trust you, Lord. I trust you. I trust you. I put my hope and confidence in you. I trust you. Isaiah said, therefore, trust you in the Lord forever. For in the Lord Jehovah is everlasting strength. Jesus still calms storms. I seen him do it. I seen him do it in the middle of the night. I seen him do it. I seen him do it in the middle of the storm. I seen him do it. I've seen him speak to the waters and the waters get sealed. I've seen him speak to the wind and the wind cease. And I've seen him speak to me and I get peace. I've seen him calm my anxious heart and my racing mind. I've seen him steady my steps and still my soul. I've seen Jesus calm storms, and he still calms storms. So do not fear. Do not be afraid. He says, I am with you. I am with you. I'm with you. Do not be afraid. Oh, Jesus. Listen. It is not until the end of the stories that we get the point. Lord Jesus. You ever been in something? You ever been through a storm? You ever been through a storm and it didn't make sense? You ever been through a trial and it didn't make sense? You ever been through a trial and a tribulation and it didn't make sense, and you didn't know what the point of it was? What is this for? And it wasn't until the end that you were able to look back and see. It is not until the end of these two stories in Mark 4 and 6 that we know the point of it all. The storm, can we keep going a minute? The storm was never about the water. The storm, Octavius, was never about the wind and the waves. The storm was never meant to kill them. They spent energy fearing something they imagined, but the storm never came to kill them. Nor was the wind and the waves about stopping them from getting to the other side. Whatever the destiny awaited them on the other side, whatever ministry opportunities awaited them on the other side, the storm was not about the other side. I thought the storm was about the demoniac that needed to be delivered. I thought the storm was about the hungry people on the east side of the sea. It is not until the end that I discover that the storm was never about their mission. It was never about their grand calling. The storm, listen, the storm was about stretching their limited view of Jesus. The storm was about moving them from fear to faith to awe. It was never about the extraneous things. It was about enlarging their vision of Christ beyond their intellect and human reasoning. The storm was to stretch their faith and understanding that they might see that this Jesus was actually more than they could ever imagine. That he was more than a teacher. He was more than a prophet. He was more than the master. He was more powerful than they had ever thought. It was to stretch their faith and their imagination. It was to stretch their mind and their heart, Mary, until they could see that Jesus was exceedingly more than they could ever imagine. It was to get them to the right question. Who then is this? It was to get them to the point that they threw away everything they thought they knew about Jesus. It was to get them to the point that they got Jesus out of the box that they had constructed for him through all the things he had already done. It was to get them beyond their religion. It was to get them beyond their mental capacity to understand and to move them to faith. It was to get them and you and I who are in a storm to ask, what have we been missing from all the stuff we've seen him do before that our faith should still be so weak? This is the point of the storm. This is the point of the storm. The storm wasn't to stop them because the storm could never stop what Jesus had already commissioned. If the storm couldn't stop what Jesus had commanded, they were going to get to the other side. The storm wasn't about the other side. The storm was about stretching their faith and getting them to ask the question, what have we been missing all this time from what Jesus has done? We have seen and heard. What have we missed that our faith should be so small and our fear should be so big? After all the times when he's healed and delivered and protected and provided, how is it that our fear is so strong and our faith is so weak? How firm our faith should be, since he has kept us so many times before. The old folk would say, from dangers seen and unseen. The point of the storm is that we might ask, who then is this? That even the winds and the seas obey him. It is that we might lift the limitations our fear and faithlessness has placed on our view of Jesus. The point of the storm was that you and I might see Christ as we have not seen him before. There is a way of knowing and coming to know Christ in a storm that you cannot know him otherwise. pity folk whose doctrine will not allow them to suffer. I pity folks whose doctrine will not allow them to go through a storm and a test, because it means that they will never know Christ in the way that he could be known. Everything, listen, everything. You look at the names of God and Christ on the wall. Everything we know of God is what he revealed to somebody who was in a storm. Everything we know of God as provider is how he revealed himself to somebody who was in need. Everything we know of God as healer was because somebody got sick. The point of the storm is that you and I would come to see that there is absolutely nothing impossible to him. That there is no limit to his power. There is no limit to his authority. No storm he cannot calm. No wind he cannot rebuke. There is nothing that is not subject to him. Even the raging waters are under his feet. So then, my brothers and my sisters and my fellow storm travelers, let us set our faith and our hope on the one who calms the winds and the waves and walks upon the waters. Be still, my soul. The Lord is on my side. Bear patiently the cross of grief and pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul. Thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul. Thy God doth undertake to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul. The waves and winds still know his voice who ruled them while he dwelt below.